I've always been nice in everything I've done. You know, Sound of Music, Blood Brothers, the R thing. There's no R in this at all.
Petula Clark makes a shocking revelation at the age of 92 regarding the cost of fame. For decades, the downtown singer kept hidden the truth about her marriage to Claude Wolfe, the death threats she received because of her political stance, and the persecution she endured at the hands of influential producers. Including the truth about what transpired in that hotel room with Elvis Presley, she is now spilling the beans. The protagonist of Petula Clark's narrative is introduced with a name that was never actually hers. On November 15, 1932, in Uli, Surrey, she was born Sally Alwyn Clark, but her father Leslie had different plans. He came up with the moniker Petula by combining the names of two of his ex-girlfriends, Pet and Aula. Despite her mother's disapproval, the name remained. Even before it started, her life had taken an unexpected turn. She did not have the typical upbringing of being in one town and having a close-knit group of friends. Her grandparents lived in the little Welsh mining town of Abercynon, and she spent a lot of time there with her parents, who were nurses. The family continued to relocate as the war progressed in an effort to evade the bombs. She became adept at picking up accents and adapting to new situations as a result of this continual transition. And she was laying the groundwork for a career in performance even while she was unaware of it. Her debut public performance seemed almost too good to be true. Standing in the middle of a packed bar, around by Welsh miners, was a 7-year-old girl. As soon as she began to sing, the room fell silent despite the dense smoke and loud conversations. It was just a little taste of what lay ahead. The true watershed moment, however, occurred in 1942. In order to record a message for her uncle, who was stationed in North Africa, she and her father traveled to London's underground Kean Theatre when she was 9 years old. People in the shelter began to get nervous as the air raid sirens went off and bombs rumbled overhead during what was intended to be a straightforward radio transmission for a BBC show called It's All Yours. In need of a diversion, the show's producer put out the call for performers. A hand went up from Petula. Her father encouraged her to pursue singing instead of impersonating a renowned comic, which was her original goal. Her voice broke through the tension in the room as she sang Mighty Leah Rose, standing on a box to get to the microphone. For a brief while, the outside conflict faded away as the orchestra joined in with her singing. There was a dramatic shift after that one performance. Many viewers and listeners wrote to the BBC after the show to express their want to hear more from the young girl with the beautiful voice. Instantly, she established herself as a radio regular. Hundreds more performances followed over the following 3 years, as her voice brought solace to a people in the midst of conflict. When she was 11 years old, she was already being dubbed Britain's Shirley Temple. People weren't praising her for her skill alone, but for the emotional impact she had on them. Her impersonations of Vera Lynn and Sophie Tucker, among others, could move audiences to tears and laughter in equal measure. She was more than just a vocalist to the soldiers. She represented home and all they stood for, so much so that they even brought her picture into combat with them. She sang everywhere from bomb shelters to hospitals to military bases, not just in posh theaters. She performed 500 concerts for the military by the time she was 12 years old. The next thing she knew, her position in history was cemented. Massive festivities were staged in Trafalgar Square in 1945 to mark the conclusion of the war in Europe. The crowd swelled to thousands of individuals who were clapping, sobbing, and hugging. Petula Clark stepped up and sang smack dab in the thick of it. A member of the nation's triumph, the girl had spent the battle raising morale. The meteoric climb to stardom that Petula Clark experienced was entirely accidental. Director Maurice Ely saw her sing in the Royal Albert Hall for British troops when she was 12 years old. Despite her lack of acting experience, he put her in the 1944 film Medal for the General because he was so pleased. A young star with a strong voice and an innate talent for the silver screen, she became known as Britain's Shirley Temple in an instant. She went on to star in 17 films over the next 5 years. Emmer Pressburger and the illustrious Michael Powell helmed one of the most pivotal I Know Where I'm Going, 1945. Even among the more seasoned actresses, her 13-year-old self stood out. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Winston Churchill, and King George VI were among her early audiences when she was just 16 years old. Her rising reputation was well reflected in the moniker "the singing sweetheart," which began to circulate. Her career was defined by her music, not her cinematic roles. Though she initially had little interest in recording the song, she eventually did so in 1954 because she felt it betrayed her maturing image. However, she was persuaded by her management, and that decision proved to be wise. Shockingly, the song peaked at #1 in Australia, making Clarke the first female British singer to ever do so, an unprecedented feat at the time, and climbing to #7 in the UK. Her audacious decision to record the song in 4 languages, English, French, German, and Italian, at a time when most musicians only recorded in one language, added to the song's revolutionary impact. The effect was enormous. She had already appeared in front of Australia's greatest audience for a performer up until that moment in 1954, a record-breaking 124,000 at the exhibition field in Newcastle. There was more to her bilingual career. Surprisingly, she didn't know a word of French when she recorded her debut single, Prends Monnaie, 1957. Without understanding their meaning, she memorized the sounds and learnt the language phonetically. Her performance was nevertheless compelling enough to propel the song into the French top 10. In 1962, she had achieved such fluency in the language that her song Chariot won the coveted Grand Prix d'Ouda in France. In the same year, her songs Mur in German and Romeo in English were simultaneously big singles. That was a feat that no other artist had ever accomplished. Clarke didn't only transpose her music, she composed new songs specifically for each market. She took creative license by singing in a variety of languages, including Italian, Spanish, and even Japanese. The French version of her song Ya Ya Twist had sold more than 1 million copies by the middle of the 1960s. Tony Hatch came to Petula Clarke in 1964 with a song titled Downtown. Hatch thought it had smash potential, but Clarke wasn't convinced. The lyrics, in her opinion, were very simplistic and did not fit her style. Hatch was adamant that the song had potential. He refused to quit up. On October 16, 1964, in London's Pi Studios, Clarke finally consented to record it. Things started to go awry as soon as the session started. The power kept going out, which caused delays. Frustration was quickly building up in the room. Clarke became so frustrated that she contemplated leaving, believing the song to be cursed. However, they persisted, intent on reaching the end. The final take was sent to them only minutes before the studio shut down. The simultaneous release of Downtown in 4 countries on November 16, 1964, was unprecedented at the time. It had an encouraging U.S. debut, peaking at #87 on the Billboard Hot 100. The subsequent events, however, were stunning. The song was an instant hit, climbing to the top 5 in just 1 month. With its #1 debut on January 23, 1965, Clarke became the first female British artist to ever reach the pinnacle of the U.S. rock and roll charts. Downtown became an international phenomenon, topping the charts in West Germany, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. And it barely finished second in the UK, where it was surpassed only by the Beatles' I Feel Fine. It wasn't only a hit, the song changed everything. Downtown was named Best Rock and Roll Recording at the 1965 Grammy Awards. Despite facing stiff opposition from the likes of the Beach Boys and the Beatles, Clarke managed to pull off the impossible, winning the prize as a 32-year-old pop singer in the era's youth-driven music culture. After Downtown, Clarke was unbeatable. She scored 15 straight top 40 songs in the U.S. from 1964 to 1968. No, one hits like My Love and I Know a Place, and #5 singles like Don't Sleep in the Subway maintained her at the top. Oddly enough, her chart success in the UK wasn't nearly as robust during that era, even though America adored her as a celebrity. Prior to her 1962 French, German, and Italian recordings, Clark had already achieved popularity in English-speaking nations. It was only with Downtown that she became famous internationally. She momentarily contemplated giving up her career in English due to her immense popularity in France. Muir became the best-selling single by an international artist in Germany, selling 1 million copies and earning a gold record. Over 70 million recordings were sold globally by the time the 1960s came to a close for Clark. Before music could be shared with the click of a mouse, she achieved genuine worldwide stardom in an age before streaming. It was surprising when Petula Clark suddenly appeared in Hollywood in the 60s. Acting in big-budget films was a new challenge for her, even if she was already famous for her songs. Even for Hollywood, there was a 34-year age disparity between the love protagonists when she earned the part in Finian's Rainbow in 1968 at the age of 35, alongside Fred Astaire, who was 69 years old. Francis Ford Coppola, in his debut feature film directing for a major company, helmed the picture. The critical reception was fantastic, but the box office take of $1.5 million was far from sufficient to declare the film a success. Nonetheless, Clark's acting was exceptional. Her charming and assured portrayal of Sharon McClellan was nominated for Best Actress in a Musical or Comedy at the Golden Globes. After Goodbye, Mr. Chips, 1969, her following picture, it nearly went under. Sian Phillips was cast by producers in lieu of Catherine Bridges just before production started. It was devastating, but then Phillips got sick right before the big game and Clark had to come back. Taking up the character that Greer Garson had made famous in the 1939 film meant she had to mature on screen for 20 years. She proved she was more than a vocalist with acting chops by delivering under the tremendous strain. The film's score, which included her voice, reached number 5 on the UK albums chart, a testament to the impact of her performance. Next, an exciting new chapter began. At the age of 48, Clark made her Broadway debut in 1981's The Sound of Music, playing the role of Maria von Trapp. Clark added maturity and insight to the part, and viewers loved her despite the unconventional casting decision. Younger actresses often played Maria. A punishing schedule even for younger artists, she remained in the production for 15 months, playing 8 shows weekly. She still had more to accomplish, though. In 1995, at the age of 62, she took on the role of Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard, a part often reserved for actresses in their 50s, her most audacious stage play to date. It was a gamble, but her inclusion on the U.S. national tour was well worth it. She conveyed Norma's sad decline from fame by playing the role with a magnificent and shattered intensity. Clark was asked to repeat the part in 1997 in London's West End, after her outstanding performance on the 56-week tour that visited 23 cities. With over 600 performances under her belt, she became the oldest actor to ever portray Norma Desmond. She had a career-defining performance in that role. Clark kept going strong even as she entered her 80s. Her 48th studio album, Living for Today, was published in 2017 at the age of 84. There were both original compositions and covers on the album, which included an unexpected cover of Steve Winwood's Higher Love. At the age of 46, she became one of the oldest performers to ever hit the UK albums chart with this album. Her voice remained powerful throughout. What followed, however, shocked everyone. In 2018, Clark didn't sit around and did nothing. Instead, he took the road. She began a 53-date tour throughout the United States when she was 85 years old, playing in places she hadn't been since the 1960s. Even younger artists have trouble playing uninterrupted 90-minute sets like her. On February 23rd at New York City's B.B. King Blues Club, the most shocking event occurred. The event went on into midnight because she remained on stage for an extra half an hour after her original set ended, playing with the house band in an impromptu session. Petula Clark accomplished a first for American television during the March 2, 1968 recording of her NBC special. As they sang Path of Glory together, she extended her hand and touched his forearm. In that split second, history was formed with a simple, organic move. At exactly 8:47 p.m., a white woman made history on American television when she touched a black man. There was no way the time was more crucial. 17 states had not yet decriminalized interracial marriage. Tensions were rising within the civil rights movement, and the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. was imminent. There was no script or strategy behind that unplanned touch. The song's heartfelt cry against war brought out the real connection between the two musicians, and that's why it occurred. Clark, deeply affected by the performance, extended his hand without thinking. The nation took note as that one incident broke an unseen racial barrier. Over 3,000 people contacted NBC by phone and mail in the first day. Viewers' reactions ranged from indignation to celebration of a long-overdue achievement in racial equality. However, the indignation hit close to home for one individual there that evening. An executive from Chrysler, whose business had sponsored the performance, Doyle Lott, was appalled. Touch, in his view, was a danger to both social conventions and the selling of automobiles. Reshoot the sequence without any physical touch. He demanded it because he was afraid Southern audiences would shun Plymouth. The ingrained prejudice in corporate America was laid bare by Lott's reply. A high-stakes 7-hour conflict ensued between him and network officials due to his demand. "Over my dead body, will this go on air?" he allegedly said. Chrysler cared more about making money than about artistic quality or public opinion. They wanted interracial touching taken off if it meant losing viewers. Petula Clark, however, declined. She was determined not to allow a sponsor to erase a significant milestone in her career, which she had established herself. The next step was crystal clear to her and her husband, Claude Wolfe. They destroyed every other take of the duet at 2:15 a.m., following a 12-hour standoff with NBC and Chrysler. Lost forever were the 37 minutes of video from 7 separate takes of the performance. To guarantee that the version in which she touched Belafonte's arm was the only one to air, they erased the tape using a magnet. Clark was taking a huge risk right then. She was making her first big foray into American television during the height of her success with 15 straight top 40 songs. But she was adamant about her position. "The performance will be shown intact, or I will never work in American television again." This was expressed about 9 p.m. Petula Clark's broadcast went off without a hitch on April 8, 1968, the precise date of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. Even though Chrysler tried their best, they were unsuccessful, and that 3.5-second human connection became an iconic moment in television history. The chance encounter between Petula Clark and the legendary "Bed In for Peace" by John Lennon and Yoko Ono at Montreal's Queen Elizabeth Hotel was one of many startling moments in her career. June 1, 1969 was the date. Clark, a tourist in the city, had no clue she was going to achieve musical legend status. As Lennon recorded the song "Give Peace a Chance," which would later become an anthem, the vibe in Room 17 was casual and even wild. The room was jam-packed with journalists, activists, and poets. Among them, Clark was offered a sheet of lyrics and politely requested to join in. A local studio owner came in a tape recorder and a couple of mics for the recording. The setup was quite modest. In spite of the A-list cast, Clark's vocals were cut from the final version. She has always acknowledged that when racing, she is unable to perceive her own voice. Still, it was a major success, becoming Lennon's first solo single and hitting the US and UK charts. Clark says it was all weird now that she thinks about it. She didn't know she was a part of musical history at the time. Just a few weeks prior, she had performed at Place des Arts, a place she had frequented in Montreal, and encountered an entirely different type of experience. Although Clark, who is bilingual in French and English, had always welcomed her multilingual audience, the vibe was different this time. There had reached a breaking point in the tension between French and English speakers in Quebec. There were severe cultural differences, and the Quebec Liberation Front had bombed that year. It was a catch-22 for Clark. Audience members speaking English heckled her when she performed in French, and the converse was true when she sang in English. It was a devastating ordeal, unlike anything she had ever encountered. Some of Clark's unanticipated meetings were more severe, while others were simply strange. She and her friend Karen Carpenter took a night off from performing in Las Vegas in the late 1960s to attend Elvis Presley's concert. Elvis was well into his return period and still dominated concerts at this time. He was careful to acknowledge Clark and Carpenter as soon as he saw them in the crowd. Following the performance, he extended an invitation to rejoin him on stage. On that particular night, Clark was clearly fascinated in Elvis, and he gushed about how beautiful he was. At first, it was unclear in whom he had an interest. It didn't take long for Clark to figure out that he was interested in her and Carpenter romantically. As one of the most renowned men in the world, Elvis Presley captivated them both. It seemed like they were in a movie. As a seasoned expert, though, Clark could feel the tide turning. "We have other things to do," she later remarked, as she snatched Carpenter and bowed out with style. Petula Clark congratulated Margaret Thatcher on becoming the first female Prime Minister of Britain in 1979 with a simple telegraph message. Clark saw it as a chance to commemorate a watershed event for women in positions of power. On the other hand, many of her admirers mistook it for support of Thatcher's conservative political views. There was an instantaneous pushback. A deluge of hate mail arrived. Her music was silenced by certain radio stations, and invites to important events vanished without a trace. In the UK, her record sales plummeted. Clark emphasized that her intention was not to make a political statement, but rather to recognize the past. It wasn't always helpful to explain things after people had already decided. She was dogged by scandal for a long time. She said in an interview from 1985 that she had no idea such a straightforward statement could spark such a storm. It was a sobering reminder that even the smallest actions may have far-reaching effects on famous people. As an enduring illustration of the fact that politics and entertainment do not necessarily mix, the Thatcher telegram stands out among other notable instances. In addition, Clark has never avoided talking about tough topics. She has personal experience with the harsh realities of the entertainment industry, particularly as they pertain to women. Harassment, wage disparity, and men with less aptitude taking precedence over her began in the 1950s. She gave an interview in 2018 in which she finally spoke out after decades of silence. In 1965, she was taken aback when a powerful producer asked her to a hotel room for what she believed to be a business meeting. This incident stands out. Upon her arrival, it became evident that he had different plans. Clark got away with it, but if she had spoken up then, her career would have been over. The reality for women in the entertainment industry was to remain silent or face dire consequences. The injustice extended beyond mere harassment. Clark spoke up about the fact that she was often underpaid compared to male artists, regardless of their level of expertise. People encouraged her to be quiet and attractive so she wouldn't have opportunities. Men were just considered to be in command, and whomever dared to question that assumption was met with professional disaster. But that was then. Clark has been much more outspoken in the last several years. She has spoken out against sexism in the workplace in interviews, op-eds, and films, lending her support to movements such as #MeToo and Time's Up. In 2020, she made it quite clear, while it's encouraging to see change, we can't let our guard down. The struggle for genuine equality has just begun. The story of Petula Clark and Claude Wolf's love began with an immediate chemistry. She met him in 1961 at Vogue Records to talk about her career as a French singer. She was 29 years old, and he was a publicist from France. Their courtship was brief, but they were married before year's end. Barbara was born in 1961, Catherine in 1963, and Patrick in 1972. Their marriage lasted for a long period, Their marriage appeared rock solid for decades, and fans recognized them as an enduring partnership in a field where such things hardly happened. However, Clark made a startling confession in 2013. She and Wolf had ended their love connection after 52 years of marriage. Although they remained legally married, they began to live apart, forging a new form of tie rather than the typical one that comes with being husband and wife. Even more peculiar was the fact that Wolf continued to serve as Clark's manager. Their working relationship never came to a close. At the age of 93, Wolf died on March 20, 2024, although he continued to oversee her career right up until the end. Clark was really crushed. She expressed her profound sorrow and inability to find words in a moving Facebook post. Their 63-year marriage had progressed from passionate love to an unexpectedly profound companionship. Their bond remained unbreakable even in the absence of love. However, her job had an effect on her children as well as her marriage. Clark has been very forthright about the parental guilt she feels. She aspired to be a doting mother, a faithful wife, and a celebrated performer all at once. Strict decisions have to be made. She would leave her home in Geneva, Switzerland for her gigs in Las Vegas at the last possible moment, attempting to spend every spare moment with her kids. She was really drained after that. Upon her arrival in the U.S., she would have very little time to settle down before taking the stage. Instead of unwinding or networking after a performance, she would jump on the first aircraft back to Geneva. Her family and her career took a hit as a result of her exhaustion from this demanding schedule. "I think both my performances and my family suffered," she said. The shame remains, even if her children comfort her by saying she was a good mother. "I do still feel guilty about not being the perfect mother and probably always will," she said openly. Among Petula Clark's many accomplishments, her work as a songwriter often goes unrecognized. Both as a singer and a composer, she was honored with induction into the Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1998. Clark penned other songs over her career, including a duet against war with Harry Belafonte, which may go unrecognized by many admirers. That performance was revolutionary for its day. It was both daring and contentious. Her achievements extended well beyond the realms of music and poetry. In her day, Clark was among the world's best-selling artists. For the biggest European album sales by a European artist in 1966, she was honored with the Mid-EM Award. She took home the trophy again the following year, this time for female artists with the most total sales in the globe. She was nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Musical in 1968 for her role in Finian's Rainbow, which put her in the company of other legendary Hollywood actors. Her cinematic roles were as bit as remarkable as her musical ones. She was nominated for British Academy Cinematic Awards for her work in Blood Brothers, Sunset Boulevard, Mary Poppins, and The Sound of Music. Petula Clark deftly dominated the worlds of music and theater, an accomplishment that is seldom achieved by performers.